I'm here. You're here. We all good? Is the microphone on? Was it on already?
Yeah, I just hooked that.
Okay. All right. All right. How about if we do that? All right. Sunday, regular schedule. Psalm sing. Sunday night. Psalm sing. So plan on that. Potluck, 5 o'clock. Music, 6 o'clock. Going to be good. Hope you'll plan on being here for that. All psalms for our winter psalm sing. So plan on being here for that. I think that's all the announcements we have. So let's pray. Jump right in, all right? Father, give us a good time together tonight. Encourage us with your word. Encourage us as we talk about these life issues that we face in our culture today. Give us wisdom. Give us courage. Give us understanding. And give us opportunity to talk about it. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right, we are going to start with an easy one tonight. One that I think is pretty uncontroversial around here. And that is abortion. How about that? I want to start off easy just to kind of get a running start into it. Here at Evangel for a long time we've had the Pregnancy Resource Center, formerly the Guiding Hand Pregnancy Resource Center, now the Downriver Pregnancy Resource Center. Really, in fact, it's going on tonight. A lot of people serve over there. And the whole goal of that is to provide support and resources for women in difficult situations, their children, for mothers and their children in difficult situations. And so we're well familiar with around here. Most of us are familiar with the basic kind of historical background of it. Really in our culture, probably 1973, Roe v. Wade, right? Jane Roe, and went to the Supreme Court, and that basically set a I'm going to simplify a bunch of stuff here, but basically set a trimester kind of situation for abortion. It is, interestingly, I don't know if you've ever read much about Roe v. Wade. I'm not going to talk much about it tonight, but it's one of those things that even those who support abortion, even those who think abortion is acceptable, good, whatever, many of those even believe Roe v. Wade was a bad legal decision. It wasn't a good legal decision, but it got the effect, and so that was 1973. Since then, the issue has been revisited many times over the course of history. One of the interesting things, and I can't do this too often because I'll be here all night, but I'll just do it once, or twice, or 3 times. One of the interesting things, if you're crazy like I am, and sometimes I watch congressional hearings on YouTube, and you watch particularly court judge nominations, and one of the interesting things is how often stare decisis comes up. Do you respect the precedents of the court? And it's often used in Roe v. Wade to say, hey, we want to make sure you're not going to overturn this. And of course, Roe v. Wade did get overturned a couple of years ago, and much caterwauling and whining and complaining, these judges lied. And you go back and look what they said. None of them said it shouldn't be overturned. They all said it was a previous decision, which it was. But here's what's interesting about that is it's often likened to, this was the decision of the Supreme Court, you can't overturn it. That's never been the case. Many Supreme Court decisions have overturned previous ones. This was the one you can't touch, apparently. But it was set in the context, and Amy Coney Barrett set this in the context, it is not a super precedent, that there are super precedents that nobody questions now, right? It's been around long enough, it's been so unquestioned. And Roe v. Wade was never there. As she pointed out, and this is absolutely true, that from the day that it was passed, Roe v. Wade has always been contested. It was never accepted like, Brown v. Board of Education or, some of these other kind of well-recognized Supreme Court cases. It was always challenged because it is such a hot-button topic. In 1992, Planned Parenthood versus Casey was a challenge to Pennsylvania laws, basically about some kinds of restrictions like spousal notice, parental notice for minors, a mandatory waiting period, informed consent, and really leaned on viability as a standard in that. But Planned Parenthood versus Casey was another decision. Probably the most familiar one to us now is 2022 Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health. And that was basically the overturning of Roe, which kicked it back to the states. There were a lot of Christians and pro-life people who thought, if we can overturn Roe, it'll get better. And as I mentioned a few weeks ago on Sanctity of Life Sunday, I think the overturning of Roe actually meant it got worse. Because what it did, it returned it to the states. And states have just such a patchwork. Even here in Michigan, there are many states who have basically just removed all restrictions on abortion whatsoever. Some have increased restrictions, and that's been heavily challenged. But the reality is abortion, we all know this, one of the most divisive, controversial issues of our day. You can have a debate very quickly, a brawl even, sides line up. Even the way we talk about it, right? You have pro-life and what? And pro-choice or pro-abortion, right? Well, we're not pro-abortion. We just want to give. And how many people? I'd never have abortion, but I don't want to tell somebody else they can't. And here's the reality. I want to be kind, but I'm going to say this anyway. All right? When it comes to abortion, people say stupid stuff and act like it makes sense. Now, again, I realize I'm here among friends largely tonight. All right? But what we're going to do in this is walk through some of the issues and then just talk about some of the stupid stuff people say. And understand that when you encounter this, depending on your relationship with a person, you might be able to say, listen, that's just a dumb thing to say. Have you thought about that? Did you think about it before you thought that? Which is a weird thing to say, right? Did you think about that before you said it? All right, so we'll talk about some of those things. But sometimes when I say, there are anti-choice people. Well, who wants to be anti-choice? So we use language to kind of shape the conversation. Those who support the right to abortion most often focus on the rights of the mother. She should be able to determine her own life, to choose whether or not to have a baby. If she's not emotionally ready, not financially ready, why you force that on her? And she might be young. She ought to have the choice to terminate that pregnancy. Maybe that pregnancy is the result of rape or incest. And surely you don't want to force a rape victim to carry the rapist's baby. How unloving can you be? Now here's an interesting question. I'm going to jump to this real quick. I probably shouldn't because I'm going to get out of order here. But one of the interesting things, and you ask people is if you ever get in a discussion about abortion, say, hey, if we agree to allow exceptions for rape and incest, will you agree to outlaw all other abortions? The answer will be no. Because, and here again, I want to say this carefully, but the reality is they don't care, and I don't mean they don't care, but they don't care about victims of rape and incest. They care about abortion. And victims of rape and incest have just become a pawn in the game to paint you into a corner. And so you ask them, hey, if I agree to allow abortion in the cases of rape and incest, will you agree to outlaw all other abortions for social reasons or whatever? They will not. You know why? Because that's not the issue. That's just a pawn in the game. All right? Some people, there's all kinds of arguments. We'll get to some of them tonight. What is abortion? It is the expulsion or removal of a child from the uterus at a stage of development when it is incapable of independent survival, resulting in its death. Okay? It's basically, and we're familiar, the removal of the baby. Okay, now, there are different kinds of abortion, right? There is what we call spontaneous abortion. What is another term for a spontaneous abortion? It's a miscarriage, right? It's one of those kind of, might just call it a fact of life that's painful, difficult, but that's an abortion. It's a spontaneous one, and then there are intentional ones. We're not really talking about the spontaneous abortions, right? We're talking about the intentional ones. There has been abortion throughout history through various things, although part of the Hippocratic Oath historically has been, will not give a woman a drug to induce an abortion. All right? So these things have happened. This is not a new issue. It's all over the place. In the mid-'60s, the abortion laws became more tolerant. Roe v. Wade found this right to privacy. Again, a lot of stuff going on. Since that time, 40 million plus abortions. That is more than 2 times the state of Michigan. Imagine it. More than 2 times the state of Michigan has been aborted. Okay? That's a lot. Now, I don't really want to get into the legal end of it tonight. I'm not a legal guy, right? It is a moral issue. It's not really, I don't get into politics that much here. I do get into moral stuff, all right? There are some legal things, but here's the reality is, and I'll get to this at the end, the legal end of it, the legal things are not going to solve the problem. It is such a part of our culture that if by some miraculous means we were able to outlaw abortion today, 100% across the board, you know what? It would still go on. How do we know that? The answer is that we already have all kinds of laws and they are frequently broken. You know why? Because laws don't stop people from doing things that they ultimately want to do. Okay? If we are going to make an impact in abortion, listen, I think our laws should change. In fact, I would go so far as to say we already have laws about abortion in every state. There's a federal law. It's called a law against murder. You cannot intentionally take a human life. Here's another one of those kind of weird things about abortion, is that there are many states in which if you kill a pregnant woman, you are actually guilty of 2 homicides. Why? Everybody knows why. Except we don't want to apply that across the board. Here's another ironic story. Tragic. There was a young woman here in Detroit, and this has been 4 or 5 years ago, made the Free Press. Young woman here in a difficult situation, 7 months pregnant, premature birth in her garage, left the baby to die. They charged her with manslaughter. Why? Because here's the reality. Had that happened in the doctor's office, it's totally acceptable. Think about the irony that goes on in so many of these discussions. And this is where it becomes really emotional. It becomes really hard on us. And so one of the things we have to learn to do in these kind of cases is talk about facts. Talk about philosophy, talk about theology, all that kind of, talk about the facts, the scientific medical things. Talk about the kind of the realm of the philosophy, the immaterial, the kind of the ideas. And also connect with humanity. Also connect with humanity. It's really easy for me to sit up here tonight in the midst of a group of friends. People who, again, as I say, imagine you're all on my side on this, right? This is easy. When you're looking at a young woman, let's just say she's 18, scared to death. And all of a sudden, it takes on a whole different shape, doesn't it? And that's what I want us to wrestle with. Listen, I think there is a really clear biblical answer on abortion. I also think there's an awful lot of difficulty and emotion in our world today. There's an awful lot of stuff that we just have to deal with. And life is rarely as neat as we would like it to be. You get involved in people's lives. What you're going to find out is you're going to get your hands dirty. And you're going to find out some stuff you don't want to know. And you're going to live some pain alongside of them. And you're going to hear some stuff that's going to want to make you run in the bathroom and throw up. But you can't do that. The Bible calls us to a life of ministry and a life of grace and a life of service. And so as we talk about this tonight, I'm going to give you a few statistics, but this isn't a statistical issue. Okay? It isn't. But having said that, about 55% favor legality in some cases, 30% in all cases. There should be no restrictions on abortion. 13% in no cases. Okay? Now, I don't know where you fall on that. Okay? I don't know where you fall on that. 86% of Democrats support legal abortion in most or all cases compared to 36% of Republicans. There's a political divide. Nearly half of Americans view abortion, 49%, as morally acceptable, 40% consider it morally wrong. Now, when you start putting some of these numbers together, like, wait a minute, that doesn't add up, right? So 55% favor legality in some cases, 49% view it as morally acceptable. So there's a gap there of people who would say it's not morally acceptable, but we should still be able to do it, right? And again, here comes that emotional argument. It's fine for you to say you don't want to do it, totally. But why? What right do you have to tell somebody else you can't do it? Again, I would say we already do that in many cases. There are a lot of kind of demographic. More women support the legality than men. Again, there are racial distinctions in that, urban, rural, all kinds of distinctions. But here's the reality. We cannot determine moral and ethical issues by polls. We have to have something more. All right? So let's talk about the kind of some pro-choice kinds of arguments here. What's the number one pro-choice argument? Probably the woman's right to choose. Hey, it's her body. Who are you to tell her what to do? Especially if you're a man, right? Strikes me as a rather odd kind of sexist argument, but it's made all the time. It's a woman's right to choose. And if you don't have a uterus, you don't have a say, right? Woman's right to choose. Here's another common argument. By the way, we'll come back to some of these. All right, I'm just going to go through them now. These are all familiar to you. A fetus is not a human being. Fetus is not human. It's and it's often said this way. It's just a fetus. Okay. Now, again, scientifically, what is a fetus? We'll get here a little bit later, but I'll just give it away right now. A fetus is a stage of development, not a type of being. A fetus is a stage of development in a mammal or human, right? It's not a type of being. It doesn't change from being a fetus to being a human at some point. Yeah, ask what kind of fetus is it? It's a human fetus, right? It's a stage of development. Unwanted pregnancies are dangerous. Life of the mother. And that life and health of the mother thing goes so far as not just physical health, and go to emotional, financial, and go to a whole bunch of different categories of things. Okay? Unwanted babies will be raised in difficult circumstances. Another common argument. Fetuses can't feel pain. Often thrown out there, right? Here's a good one. Jesus never said anything about abortion. Well, the Bible doesn't prohibit it. Again, we'll talk about that. These are just, laws don't stop it. Hey, if you put a law against abortion, you're just going to drive them in the back alley with coat hangers. Do you really want to do it? Because then it's really unsafe. Right? So people throw all these kinds of arguments out. And I want us to, again, think about these kind of things carefully and try to work our way through, because what I want to do is equip us to think, because sometimes, here's what I think, we as Christians, we know certain things instinctively, and we believe them, but we can't defend them. We don't really know what to say about them. And sometimes we hear an argument, and we know somewhere back there's something I know I should respond here, I just don't know what it is. All right, but so let's just walk through kind of three categories here for a moment. What about the Bible and abortion? What does the Bible say about abortion? Well, number one, in the Bible, the same words are used for both the born and the unborn. There's not a separate word for the unborn. The same words. The Hebrew word is yeled, used for children, both born and unborn. In Exodus 21:22, it's used for the unborn. Okay? It's the same word. All right? The Greek word, Acts 7:19, refer to children killed at Pharaoh's command. And it's also used of John the Baptist before he's born. The same word is used for both. There's no distinction in the words. In the Bible, personal pronouns and names are used for the unborn. You know why? Because they're somebody. Man had relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. He had a name when he was born. You formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. Personal pronouns are used for the unborn. Now, why is that the case? Right? I think it's because it's a person. And again, we kind of know that. You know, remember David. In sin, my mother conceived me. That's not talking about what David's mother was doing when she got pregnant. That's talking about David's spiritual state. Before he was born, he was a sinner. Right? Elizabeth in Luke 1, when Mary shows up, at the sound of your greeting, when the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. John the Baptist. Right? Personal things. Jeremiah, right? A person in his mother's womb. You called me from the womb. Right? The Bible doesn't make this distinction between there's an unborn that's one kind of being, and there's a born that's another kind of being. So the Bible doesn't make that distinction. The unborn are treated as fully human. Here's one of those passages. In fact, this is one of the ones that frequently comes up. So if you have your Bibles, turn to Exodus 21. This is probably the most familiar passage in the discussions on abortion. Exodus 21. And look at verse 22. All right? All right. If men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child. Now let me ask you a question. All right? What are the next words in your translation? Skip it if you have a New American Standard. Pastor Steve, you got a New King James? What is it? You got the ESV? What is it? If she
hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out.
So that her children come out? Who else has something there?
Or born prematurely.
Born prematurely? What version you have?
CSB.
CSB. Okay.
Give birth.
Give birth. What do you got? What? New American Standard? Yeah. Anybody here have a King James? What do you got? So that her fruit departs from her, right? All right. So here's one of those things, and people have used this passage to argue that this thing, what happens, that fruit departing from her, what is that? All right, is that a birth? Is that a miscarriage? Right? What is it that's happening here? Now, let's read these verses again. Look at them. If men struggle, she strike a woman with child, so that she gives birth prematurely, yet there is no injury, he shall be fined as the woman's husband may demand of him. He shall pay as the judges decide. But if there is any further injury, then you shall appoint as a penalty life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. All right, so here's the arguments often made about abortion. All right, they strike the woman, she miscarries, but there's no injury. Therefore, nothing's done. The rest of it is all about injury to the woman or to the men involved. Now, if you understand that passage to be referring to a premature birth, and this is what I think the passage means, and the words used there are referring to a birth. All right, so here's what I think. If you strike this woman and she gives birth prematurely and there is no injury to the baby, then it's just a fine. However, if there is injury, then you have these other kinds of penalties. What we call in Latin the lex talionis, the eye for an eye, right? That was the penalty. If you strike this woman, she gives birth and the baby is harmed, there's this principle of eye for eye, tooth for tooth, right, all the way up to life for life. So when people say, well, the Bible doesn't address this abortion thing? I think it actually does. Quite outside the fact that we have a commandment, thou shalt not kill, right? That should be enough. But this specifically addresses the premature birth or injury that results from a premature birth. If there's no injury, it's still wrong, it's just a fine. If there's an injury, then you have this system of punishment for it, this system of consequences. Now, there is a Hebrew word for a miscarriage. It's not used here. This is a birth. Okay? If there is hurt, there's a penalty for it. Okay? So when people go to Exodus chapter 21 and say, well, that's an abortion, or that's no, it's not. It's a premature birth. Okay? Humanness is part of the unborn child. Again, David, Psalm 51, I was brought forth in iniquity, and sin my mother conceived me. Again, there is humanness in that unborn. Now, here's one of the discussions, we have people, well, it's not human, it's just a fetus. Well, what kind of fetus is it? It's a human fetus, right? Is it alive? Yeah, it's living. Everybody knows that. It's living, all right? It's a living human. Okay? Now, again, that's part of the scientific argument. What is often said in the, well, it's just a clump of cells. How can a clump of non-human tissue be described as sinful? Right? We wouldn't say that, right? We understand that sin is a part of the human experience, and David says that happens in the womb. God's interest in a person begins long before birth. You formed my inward parts, you wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. My frame was not hidden when I was made in secret, skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. It's a reference to that unborn, that God's interest in humanity and God's description of humanity are long before. There's much more going on in the womb than just the growth of a bunch of cells, right? Babies have responses in the womb. And we all know that, right? Every mother knows that, right? Now, we want to minister grace, but we can't pretend as if that baby is not a human being. It reminds me, I saw this thing recently. This mom was singing this song to her young child, and the child's like, I don't like that song. And the mom says, well, that's the song I used to sing to you when I was pregnant with you. He says, I didn't like it then either. All right. But babies in the womb, they have responses. Maybe you've seen the picture of, and I'm sure there's more than one at this point, but there was a pretty famous picture. I think it was Ben Carson who's done surgery on babies in the womb. And that hand sticking out, and they're able, why? Because it's a human life. And there's something that we all know about that, right? God's interest in that. Let's talk for just a moment about science and abortion. The unborn person is a distinct person. The unborn is a distinct person with its own body and its own DNA. Now, I'll come back to this in a moment. But you say, well, it's a woman's body, right? A woman has two heads? What woman do you know that has two heads? Or two hearts? Or four eyes? Or four arms? We know that's a distinct human body, right? We know it's a distinct. Nobody thinks that. We haven't seen a woman with two heads since we saw, some kind of ancient, idol, right? It's a distinct human body with its own distinct human DNA. The heart forms very early. Again, these are just scientific things, right? The fetal heartbeat has become one of the major kind of discussions in the whole realm of abortion debates. The unborn can feel pain. Right? They can't express it, but they can feel it. People say, well, it's not human until it's born. What happens at birth that makes it human? Nothing happens at birth that makes it human. As one person said, it's a difference of location. It used to be there, now it's here. There was a comedian who was talking about at the birth of his first child. He said, well, my wife were there, I were there in the room, and all of a sudden there was a third person in the room. I got so excited, I ran to tell my wife the news. All of a sudden, but it was a third person already there. Right? Again, scientifically, Nothing happens at birth that makes it human. Now here's, well, again, one of those things, we'll talk about this along the way in some of our discussions of bioethics and some when we get there. Medical technology and medicine has made viability much earlier. You ever been to NICU? I would be totally fine to never go back to NICU again. I've been there. I've visited babies there and moms and dads. But man, there's some amazing technology that can go on in the neonatal intensive care units. We just have so much medical technology. And why is it that a baby is born at 7 months and the hospital rushes that baby into the NICU and they're hooking up and monitoring and feeding and doing all this stuff? Why are they doing that? Because they know it's a human being, right? Deserving of care. And yet that same baby could be aborted, killed. And somehow, sometimes we just don't see the disconnect there. Again, here's what I know. I know I'm talking to friends tonight. But I want to just put this in a way that I hope challenges you to think a little more, that when you're having conversations with people, think about, if this topic comes up, think of how can you challenge her? Remember that young teenage mother who left the baby to die in the garage, and how sad that is. And yet, just down the street in the doctor's office, it would have been okay. There's a huge disconnect. And by the way, I think people say, well, keep your religion out of my body, right? Well, abortion is just a religion. It's not just a religious argument, not per se. I mean, obviously it all stems from God, right? There is no argument that's not ultimately religious, right? Because God is the source of all truth. God is the source of all logic. God is the source of everything we have. And personally, I don't feel the need very often to completely abandon a religious argument. But I don't think we have to use a strictly religious argument to oppose abortion. We can use a medical argument. We can use a scientific argument. When you say, well, that's just a fetus, that's pretty unscientific, because it's not just a fetus. A fetus is a stage of human development. Right? So we can use scientific argument. What do we say about Christians and abortion? Well, number one, we must value all of life. Value all of life. Not just the ones that are convenient to us. Not just the ones that are kind of helpful to us. Not the ones we like. We must value all of life. Oftentimes abortion decisions are like, hey, you have some problems. Your child's going to be born with certain deficiencies, certain challenges. And oftentimes those things become reasons for abortion. As if that baby made in the image of God is not worthy of it. We have to value all of life. Not just the convenient, not just the ones we like, right? We must not rely too heavily on government. I would prefer our laws be different. But here's what I know is I don't think our laws are going to solve the problem. It's ultimately a problem of the human heart. We have all kinds of laws about stuff that still go on because people are sinners. And some are more open sinners than others, and some are more grotesque sinners than others, and some are more respectable sinners than others. But laws don't stop crime. Laws create crime. You know how we could get rid of crime in our country? Get rid of laws. Right? There's a sense in which law creates crime. That's a principle of Romans chapter 7, right? I would not know sin except for the law. Right? The law is what defines that. Now, here's the reality. We can't rely too much on government. I mean, I think our law should be different. I was in favor of overturning Roe. I'm not in favor of the outcome of that. Okay? It's the life we live in. But here's the reality. When you come across a young lady who's hurting and scared and difficult, she doesn't need to read the United States code books. We need to serve her with love and compassion. Right? We cannot rely too heavily on government. We must provide some alternatives. There's all kinds of alternatives to abortion. Perhaps the number one is adoption. Adoption. Now, I would not say that every single young lady should give her baby up for adoption. It can be a positive outcome. It can be a help. Adoption is something that I think is important to me and my family. And we're grateful for it. I think it can be an option we provide and encourage. We need to provide support and care for unwed mothers, counseling, teaching, helping to provide for their needs. The gospel certainly, but also not in distinction from the gospel, but alongside the gospel, just emotional, parental help, sitting and loving and helping, assuring of support. Right? And by the way, that's a lot of what goes on in our pregnancy center, and so many people who are involved in that, both from Evangel, from other area churches that partner with us along the way. So many opportunities just to provide support, sympathy, financial help, clothes, diapers, all kinds of stuff. Listen, there's a part of say, well, hey, you need to take care of your stuff. You need to take care of your family. Well, yeah, you do. But you know what? Along the way, there's some people in hard places, and we need to provide support for that. And I'm grateful that Evangel has a long history of doing that, and we intend to continue that. I think along the way, we need to teach and model biblical purity in family. Okay, now, a lot of people don't have that kind of upbringing. A lot of people don't have that kind of teaching in their families, and certainly not in their schools and in the culture at large. But I think we as a church need to model that. We need to teach it. We need to show it along the way. We need to teach that in our families, to try to encourage that. We need to model it, right? We need to talk about grace. There's a lot of people who are in hard times, and even for those who have had abortion, as I say often about other sins, I'll say it about this one: you didn't find the one sin Jesus didn't die for. And I imagine, and I've read, I've heard, a lot of people who have had an abortion are they want to keep it a secret. Right? Some people are proud of it, but again, providing mercy, even in the midst of sin, to provide mercy and grace to people who are struggling. Carol.
Well, you were just talking about people that have had abortion. When I was in school, we did a government class, and we had to do a debate on abortion. And there was a gal in the class that she had an abortion. And she was so eaten up by that that she had to drop out of the class.
Yeah.
She just couldn't let it go.
There are I know somebody who mother gave the baby up for adoption. Every year on a birthday, the mother cried. Probably much more often, but wondering what happened. Where's she at? What's going on? It can be a tremendously heavy thing. One of the things, and I'll just, since we're on this topic, one of the things people say, and this is used by pro-choice people, listen, abortion is such a tough decision on a young woman already. Don't make it worse with all your guilt and your shame and your laws and trying to talk her out of it. How should we respond to that? Why is it so hard? Why is it so hard? Here's the thing: doctor says, you know what, you have a tumor. You don't spend a lot of time thinking about, should I take it out or not? You don't. You know why? You know why it's hard? I would suggest to you it's hard because she knows what she's doing. She knows. So when people say, it's hard enough without this, say, why is it so hard? The answer is because we know. Here's some popular arguments, and let me just walk through some of this. I've already talked about some of them. Somebody says, it's only a fetus. All right, what do we say? What is a fetus? It's a stage of development. It's not a type of being. That fetus does not magically become human at some point. When people say it's only a fetus, it's like, it's not quite the same, but it's along the line saying, well, it's only a toddler. That's a stage of life development, right? It's a stage of development. What kind of fetus is it? It's a human fetus. Is it alive? Yes. Right now, if it's dead, let's get it out. Right? By all means. Right? If it's dead, and some have had that, where the baby dies in the womb, and doctors, and yes, listen, there's a lot of grief goes into that. Right? But all right, it's a human fetus. It's a living human fetus. And somebody pointed, do we think because it's really small and in a particular place that it doesn't deserve the rights and the protection of something that's a little bigger and in a different location? Do we really want to tie it down to size and location? That because it's small and it's in a mother's body, therefore we can do something to it. But if it was a little bigger and outside the mother's body, we can't do something to it, right? There's a philosophical disconnect there, right? It's just a clump of cells. Yeah, we all are just clumps of cells, right? I mean, that's what we're made up of. Now, there's that immaterial part of us. But the argument that it's just a clump of cells, one guy told me one time, well, it's just like the skin cells you wash down the drain in the shower. Right? What? Yeah. Like, you watch that elbow going down the elbow got stuck. No, it's not just like it's not, right? Again, as I say, there's a lot of people, and again, I want to say this kindly, but there's a lot of people who just say stupid stuff because they haven't thought about it. Now, don't tell them that unless you know them. You might know somebody well and say, that's just a dumb thing to say. But be careful with that. But when people say, well, it's just a clump of cells. Well, that's all we all are. But there's development in that, right? It can't survive independently. Right? Can't survive independently. Well, here, newsflash. And if you're parents, you know this. Your child will never survive independently. In fact, you and I don't survive independently. We have to have all kinds of people come alongside us to help in all kinds of things. But the reality is when that baby, nothing magical happens when the baby is born and the umbilical cord is cut. Right? Nothing magically changes. That baby doesn't get up and walk around. It doesn't feed itself. And in fact, if somebody doesn't help that baby, you know what it's going to do? It's going to die. It cannot survive independently is not an argument in favor of abortion. It can't feel pain. Well, actually it can. Okay? However, feeling pain is not a measure of personhood. Some of you, myself included, some of us, I shall say, I have nerve damage in places I can't feel pain. Right? Because of various injuries, and it's kind of eerie in some ways. I remember going to the doctor one time after I had back surgery. This has been a lot of years ago now, and she has this tuning fork, right? And it vibrates. Tuning fork is how you tune a piano, right? If you're old school and you're really good. She hits it on the ground and it vibrates, and if you hold it, it'll put out. Anyway, all that she and touches it to my leg. She says, "Can you feel that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can feel that." She touches to the other leg. I'm like, "Oh, I didn't feel that." Because the nerve damage on one side, I could feel something touching it. But over on the other side, I could feel the vibrations. Like, right? Listen, ability to feel pain is not a measure of personhood. So even if the baby can't feel pain, that doesn't mean it's not a person, right? It's a woman's body. It's her choice. As I said earlier, so you tell me a woman has 2 heads? 4 arms? 4 eyes? 2 hearts? No. It's a different body. It has its own DNA. By the way, I always like to remind you, we can't make laws about a woman's body. We already do. There's not a woman here who can legally sell a kidney. You can donate it. You can't sell it. There are all kinds of things we tell people you can't do with your body. Right? We've already accepted, that's just a part of our culture. We all know that. Right? It's not a woman's body. She should have reproductive freedom. I agree. I absolutely agree. Now, I do premarital counseling for couples. And one of the discussions we have in premarital counseling is, what are your family intentions? I think marriages, barring some providence of God that makes it physically impossible, should be open to children, should pursue that. Always makes me nervous when somebody says, oh, we don't intend to have children. Too expensive. They're expensive, right? We all know that, right? It's a lot of hassle, more than you can imagine, right? However, we have that discussion. I would say, listen, I totally believe a woman should be free to choose to reproduce or free to choose not to reproduce. She is not free, however, to kill the results of that choice. That's a choice made ahead of time, not a choice made afterwards. It's like you jump off a bridge. You don't get to choose to stay on the bridge at that point. Right? Now, even if the pregnancy was well, we didn't mean to. Okay. But you made a choice. So there's a sense in which a party must say, well, I'm pro-choice. But most people wouldn't understand that. I'm like, I'm pro-choice, like choose not to. I'm totally fine with that. Choose not to have a baby. Choose not to get pregnant. But you don't get to kill the baby after you do. You shouldn't force a woman to become a mother by forcing her to give birth. What do we say to that? She's already a mother. That's one of those kind of weird things in our, a woman's pregnant. Hey, we're gonna be parents. No, you already are. Okay. Now I understand. Well, forced birth, and this is one of those things now that kind of code words that come. Oh, forced birth, government forced birth, right? All that. Well, she's already a mother. Okay. And by the way, killing the baby is not going to change that. Now she's the mother of a dead child. Now again, handle that very, very carefully when you start talking to people. Handle it very, very carefully. But we need to have the categories in our mind about what we're talking about. You shouldn't force a rape victim to carry her rapist baby. Now remember what I said earlier. You're having these discussions. Hey, if I agree to exceptions for rape and incest, will you agree to outlaw the rest of them? The answer will always be no, we won't agree to that. You know why? And again, I say this carefully, but the rape and incest victims are not really the issue. I fully believe they care about those rape and incest victims, and that's a horrible, tragic circumstance. But killing the baby doesn't make that young woman unraped. It doesn't change it. It's difficult. It is exceedingly difficult. And we need to walk exceedingly carefully. But here's a question we should have in our minds. For what other crimes do we execute the children of the criminal? For what other crimes do we execute the children of the criminal? Yeah, your dad's a rapist. Let's kill you. No. We don't do that, right? In fact, we have laws against that. You don't get to punish somebody who's not convicted of the crime. And yet, here's one of those things. And listen, it's hard None of this is easy. It's easy for me sitting here among friends. When you sit down face to face with a victim of rape, and she's trying to decide what to do, it just got real, right? And you're no longer dealing, with internet chat rooms and online debate forums and even church friends where we talk about theory. You're looking at a broken person. And somehow to minister grace and somehow to communicate. Don't punish that kid for that. Don't punish that kid for that. It's hard enough on a woman without the guilt and shame. Why? Because she knows. She knows. Now, there are some for whom it does not register. But by and large, when people say, this is a really hard decision, I'm telling you right now, if you have cancer, it's unlikely to be a hard decision for you. Probably the hardest thing is waiting for the surgery to be scheduled. You mean I can't get it for 3 weeks? Right? We don't struggle with those things. When I've, and again, you don't trivialize it, but listen, if you've had surgery, I've had 2 knee replacements, right? I didn't struggle with that. I didn't sit around the night before that, oh man, they're going to take my knee out, what am I going to do? I was ready. I was ready for it. And I knew it was going to hurt for a long time. Right? It's hard because we know what it is. So I say all that tonight to encourage us. As I say, for us in this setting, in this church, in this kind of place that we're here at Evangel, this is an easy one. All right? Now maybe along the way, hopefully I maybe encouraged you with maybe some questions you didn't have answers to. Maybe not. Maybe this is all review for you. But in the end, let me go back to this slide. If I was a better planner, I would have already had that up there. All right? Value all of life. Don't rely on government. At the end of the day, abortion is intensely personal. Provide alternatives. Provide support. Teach and model a different way of living. And talk about grace. That's what we do as a church, right? Let's knock it off there, right, Jim?
Isn't abortion often used as an excuse to start euthanasia?
Well, the original...
Talk about euthanasia.
Yeah, what's the matter with the euthanasia? Originally, this topic was to be abortion and euthanasia. However, it became abortion, and euthanasia will come later. Well, it'll be more connected towards the other end of life decisions. But some of the same principles are involved. Whose life is it? Right? God gave that life. And whether that life is tiny in the womb, or that life is crippled on a bed as a 90-year-old or 90, right? The life is the same. God gave it. We don't get to take it. But yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. Let's pray. Father, within a world where so many difficult things and around us, there's a lot of hurting people, young women who are scared and nervous and not sure where to go. May we be a beacon of hope to them. Bring them in contact with the pregnancy center. I pray for the ladies that work so faithfully there with such love and devotion and grace in their hearts for these women. I pray, Father, that we might be to them a source of grace and help and support and mercy, that you would save lives through that. All around us are these difficult situations, and so may we be able to minister that effectively. Give us a heart of courage, a heart of biblical clarity, and a heart of love for those around us. May we serve effectively and faithfully in it. We ask these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. We have prayer sheets on the high top table. Grab some prayer sheets, grab some people, pray. And I'll look forward to seeing you Sunday, 9:30, 10:30, 5 o'clock for the potluck, 6 o'clock for the psalm sing. It's going to be good. You're going to want to be here. Pastor Stephen has once again put together a great set of songs for us. So if we can be there Sunday night. See ya. Have a great night. Great.